The air smelled like dust and overheated metal, the kind that lingered even after the sun dipped behind the ridgeline. Captain Reagan Monroe stood beside the AH-64 Apache she'd just finished inspecting, one hand resting lightly on the fuselage. The bird was ready. Systems, cold, but green. Blades locked, fuel topped, nothing left to adjust, nothing left to doubt. Her call sign blaze wasn't stitched anywhere visible, but it was understood. Most didn't use it to her face. She didn't mind. From across the open tarmac, the operations tent buzzed with calm static and filtered light. Voices drifted through its canvas walls, some direct, others clipped by poor signal bounce. Blaze didn't need to hear every word to follow the thread. SEAL team. Charlie had completed the kill. Echo Kilo was confirmed down. The tone in the tent had shifted after that. Not relief. Not yet. Something sharper. Unease bleeding into protocol. She turned slightly toward the open tent flap. A new voice cut in over the comms, distorted and fast. The words weren't clean, but the message carried. They were compromised. Surrounded. Blaze narrowed her eyes. In the distance, a tower beacon blinked red through the growing dark. She didn't move at first. Just listened. The Apache behind her cast a long shadow across the tarmac, broken only by the empty shape of her helmet still hooked to the cockpit rail. No one called for her. No scramble alert went out. Inside the tent, a dozen figures circled a single monitor. Someone barked coordinates. Someone else hesitated. Blaze watched the posture of the group shift. They were calculating. Too many inputs. Not enough courage. She stepped closer to the edge of the shadow, boots slow but steady. The comms traffic thickened faster, now clipped with panic. There was mention of anti-air threats, possible man-pads in the valley, no clear air corridor. One officer raised his voice, asking if confirmation of hostiles was still ambiguous. Another voice answered too slowly. Blaze looked at the Apache again. It sat quiet, waiting. Its rotors still, its weapon systems untouched. She walked a slow arc around the nose, checking nothing, but thinking everything. The choice wasn't written anywhere. There was no line in any protocol that told her what to do next. But the helmet was still hanging, waiting. She didn't lift it, not yet. She simply stood there, watching the sky go darker over the range, listening to men inside argue about whose call it should be. She already knew. The Tactical Operations Center was cold from overworked air conditioning and bright in the way only fluorescent light could be flattening, unstopping, hard. A dozen screens glowed against the far wall, each cycling through drone feeds, threat overlays, and radar returns in a color palette. No one in the room seemed to question anymore. The coffee was stale, half drunk from paper cups littering the folding tables. Maps were pinned, repinned, and half unpinned again as staff circled grids that had already been debated twice over. Captain Reagan Monroe stood near the back, still in flight gear, visor clipped to her hip, helmet looped around one arm. Her boots were clean. Her posture was straight. She hadn't spoken since she stepped in. That was part of the pattern. Blaze watched. Someone at the front muttered about battery signature near the southern ridgeline, likely a SAM. Another man across the table pointed out a thermal anomaly on the slope. Still inconclusive. One lieutenant colonel leaned over the screen and tapped the edge with a stylus, drawing a circle around the zone with enough pressure to leave a mark. No one gave a green light. They're boxed in. If we wait for seed confirmation, we lose them, Reagan said. Her voice even, not raised. She didn't move closer, didn't push, just stated what they all already knew. The major across the room didn't look up. Sam's still active. We're not launching birds into that corridor. Reagan's tone didn't shift. I can stay low through the western draw. You've got 500 meters of terrain masking. You'd be lit up by the time you cleared the saddle, the major replied. His eyes went back to the display. We're not authorizing launch. Another officer, younger, offered a quiet, we've got no visual on the asset anyway. Could be friendly or hostile. Nothing confirmed. No one answered that. The screen at the front flickered again. Blue for friendly, red for probable. The corridor glowed a pale orange indeterminate threat. Blaze looked once at the radar display, then at the cluster of shoulders hunched in fear around it. The screen wasn't the problem. The room was. She stepped back without another word. No salute, no protest, no motion to draw attention. The door opened, then closed. Behind her, the radar display refreshed again, orange deepening toward red. But no one followed. The airspace was black, but she had seen through worse. The hangar lights hummed faintly as Reagan Monroe stepped back onto the tarmac, her helmet swinging low from her fingers. The Apache stood exactly where she had left it, silent, intact, fully armed, and untouched by the debate unraveling behind her. No one followed her out of the TOC. No one stopped her. Somewhere off to the left, one of the mechanics shouted her name. Another yelled something about clearance. She didn't answer. She was already walking. Her boots rang out against the hardened surface. The dusk had deepened into full shadow now, and the faint red glow from the hangar spilled unevenly across the bird's fuselage. She moved with purpose, climbing onto the step rail and sliding into the pilot seat without hesitation. Her fingers went straight to the battery switch. One flick. Then the APU. The cockpit blinked to life in dull sequence screens, warming, warning lights strobing once, then settling. She didn't rush. Every motion was clean, deliberate, without waste. The pre-flight checks had been completed hours earlier. No co-pilot meant no confirmations. She didn't need them. She strapped in with practiced ease, harness locking across her chest. Her right hand reached for the encrypted tablet cradle and snapped it into place just above her left knee. The system paired instantly. She keyed in her own secure net, bypassing the broader channel they'd just denied her inside the TOC. Outside the glass, the ground crew had stopped shouting. One man hovered near the skids but didn't come closer. He saw the look on her face. That was enough. She reached for the helmet. The click of the chin strap locking in place cut through the rising whine of the turbine, spooling to idle. The rotors started slow, then grew in tempo soft, then louder, then pushing into full thrum. Her hands danced across the collective and cyclic. Systems check rolling silently across her HUD. She glanced once at the clipboard wedged into the console bay. The manifest form was blank, half-printed. She took her pen, scratched through the empty slot, and wrote in her own block letters, Pilot Blaze. No manifest. Nothing more. The bird vibrated beneath her, rotors now slicing the dark with purpose. The engines stabilized, warnings cleared, flight systems synced. She eased the throttle forward, nose tipping into the night. No orders, no signature, but the air didn't need either. It just needed someone to fill it. The ridgeline peeled open like a torn seam under moonless sky. Black earth barely distinguishable from darker sky. Reagan Monroe dropped the Apache into the gap between two jagged shelves of rock, eyes flicking between her HUD and the shadow ahead. Her flight profile hugged the contours as tightly as the bird would allow, skimming barely meters above uneven stone. The tablet screen on her knee flickered again, terrain overlays stuttering before reloading with half a delay. She didn't wait for them to catch up. The night air was unstable. Heat still radiated off the canyon walls from the day's burn, throwing microbursts across her flight path. She adjusted cyclic pressure gently, barely nudging the bird to compensate. Beneath her, the gorge twisted. One bank, then a hard dip left. She didn't need to see the map anymore. She remembered this draw. They all looked the same unless you knew which one had the cross-current that bucked too hard just past the third switchback. Her visor showed a brief flash of something lock alert. Upper right quadrant. Her stomach didn't flinch. Altitude stayed low. Profile flat. She dropped another 10 meters into a sharper pitch, letting the terrain do what the radar couldn't. The lock alert vanished 2 seconds later. No plume, no engine fire, just silence again, save for rotor noise tightly absorbed by canyon acoustics. The Apache's engine tone leveled. Steady now. Blaze exhaled slowly, not out of relief, but to match the system rhythm. Every breath she took, The bird took two. Left hand on the collective, right on the cyclic. Her wrists didn't shake. The pressure was there, but she'd long since made peace with it. She adjusted trim, shifted line, and kept going. The terrain narrowed again. A dry creek bed split below her, giving way to a ridged overhang she couldn't bank above. She ducked under it, dropping to nap of earth so fast the proximity alarm chirped once before she silenced it. She keyed her mic with a gloved thumb. Her voice stayed low, just above a whisper, as if louder speech might pull her out of alignment with the darkness. "Charlie team, this is inbound rotary. Confirm last ping." No reply. Just static. And the flickering of her map again, its overlays ghosting over the terrain in half-rendered layers. She didn't look down. She was already flying the version she remembered. No orders, no satellite, no one guiding her hand. Just a valley, a team somewhere ahead, and the sound of her own breath against steel. The compound came into view just as the ridge dipped enough to show the valley floor. Blaze spotted the flashes first. Red-white bursts from muzzle fire flaring across a crumbling outer wall. The structure had collapsed inward on its north side, exposing the second level to open sky. A torn American flag hung limp against scorched rebar. The seals were pinned behind broken stone and hastily propped corrugated steel, their formation barely holding under the pressure. She counted two on the roof, one limping back from the edge. Three more inside the shell of a room that once had walls. The militia had them boxed tight, forming a U-shape along the south slope. No heavy armor, but disciplined fire patterns and at least one RPG team on the left flank. Blaze circled wide behind a rock spire, running her altitude low enough to stay below line of sight. The terrain was steep and unforgiving, no stable landing surface within 100 meters. She wouldn't be putting down. This wasn't extraction. Not yet. She eased the cyclic forward and came around the ridge slow, then fast. The Apache's shadow streaked across the canyon wall just seconds before her rotors cleared the slope. Blaze dropped elevation by another 10 feet as her targeting system pinged for manual override. She didn't need it. The first burst from the 30mm cannon shattered the dry rock just in front of the RPG team. Dust, debris, and a scream cut short. She swept the gun left, hitting a second nest tucked behind a broken vehicle husk. Third burst pinned a machine gun team mid-reload. The hillside recoiled. Fighters scrambled in all directions, firing upward in panic but too late, too disoriented to track her line. Blaze banked hard to the right and disappeared behind the next rise without a word. She kept radio discipline, knowing they would see her before they'd hear her voice. A half-broken voice came over comms, crackling through haze. "Holy hell, is that ours?" She didn't respond. The compound was still under pressure, but it wasn't alone anymore. She'd cut enough of a gap for them to breathe. That was the only metric that mattered now. The roof was too unstable, the slope too narrow, the fire too concentrated. There was no place to land. But she didn't need to land to stand between them and the grave. She just needed to keep flying low and keep the sky angry. The targeting reticle stuttered, then blinked out completely. For a moment, only the dim, red fallback markers stayed lit on her HUD. Reagan Monroe didn't flinch. She adjusted her heading by instinct, turning just enough to avoid the outcrop she remembered from the recon photos 2 days earlier. Static filled her left ear. The encrypted channel she'd used for the last 3 passes gave a long burst of garbled tones before dying to silence. Her tablet flickered on her knee, overlays jittering like a corrupted file. The terrain grid layered over itself 3 times before dropping to a blank gray screen. Coordinates were gone. Threat zones vanished. No confirmation of friendly strobes. She reached down, unlatched the mount, and dropped the tablet into the side pouch. It wouldn't help her now. Beneath the cockpit glass, the valley blurred past dark rock, dead brush, the glow of a distant fire on the north slope. She steadied the cyclic and pulled the old laminated map from the left panel compartment. It unfolded in 3 practiced flicks. Her gloved finger traced the ridgeline and counted half a click west. The grease pencil marks were from a briefing she hadn't been invited to lead but had memorized anyway. One circled grid, one terrain notch. That's where they'd fall back if pinned. That's where they were now. She keyed her comms again, this time over open frequency. Her voice was calm, firm, unshaken. Request blue smoke only, one grid back. No authentication code, no reply. She held the Apache steady on her climb, angling above the bluff just enough to see the clearing beyond the ruined compound. A line of smoke trailed upward from the tree line, faint at first, then solidifying into unmistakable blue as the breeze caught it. No signal, no name, no light. Just smoke. She circled once. Tight radius. Low throttle. The noise of her rotors was the only thing filling the space where systems used to speak. She adjusted altitude by feel, not by readout. The Apache moved as if it understood what she was asking without having to show her numbers. Inside the cockpit, everything digital remained dead or dying, but in her hand, the old map stayed open. Her grease pencil grid sat exactly where they'd just marked themselves. It had never needed a satellite to be right. The lifeline was jammed, so she drew another by hand. Reagan Monroe didn't hear words anymore, just clicks. One sharp burst meant fallback. Two in rapid succession meant breach. The SEALs had shifted to a dead calm workaround, stripped down to tones and rhythm. It was enough. They were still alive, and she was still in the sky. That was the contract now. Her flight kneeboard sat open against her thigh, oil-stained, edges curled from years of use. Grease pencil notations mapped ridgelines, shadow falls, and dead zones. She traced them in reverse now, matching memory to terrain as the night deepened. No GPS, no waypoint nav, just her eyes, her hands, and a machine that still trusted her enough to fly. She banked hard into a turn above the south ridge, angling over a ravine she had marked earlier as a blind spot. 2 clicks came in through static sharp, coded, unmistakable. Breach in progress. She dipped the nose and lined up the run without hesitation. The compound's edge burst into view, muzzle flashes dancing between jagged wall fragments. Her cannon barked 3 bursts, clean and low. Dust erupted in tandem. No overkill, just enough to stop a reposition. That was all they needed. She climbed, pivoted west, and circled the draw. 1 click. Fallback. She adjusted again, angled her line toward the ridge just past the burned truck hull, and held her fire. Sometimes not firing was the only answer. Her presence alone kept heads down. Inside the cockpit, the world was reduced to the rhythm of rotors and her own breath. Every pass was a meditation. No alarms, no overlays, just gut and topography. She flew low, tracing curves of rock and shadow like second skin. The Apache moved with her no resistance, no protest. Another 2 clicks. She dropped fast and low again, angling toward a cluster of rubble near the northwest wall. The cannon fired. 1 burst. The enemy had been about to crest. Her hands didn't tremble. The controls answered her like breath answers lungs. The radio crackled not a click this time, but a voice, hoarse and out of breath. "Still don't know who the hell you are, but don't stop." Blaze said nothing. She adjusted trim with a flick of her thumb and leveled off into another pass. She wasn't flying above them anymore. She was flying with them, breach by breach, angle by angle. The bird had become an extension of the ground fight. She knew where they would go next because she would have gone there too. The fire control panel showed nothing but zeros. Reagan Monroe tapped the screen once to clear the last alert, but there was no mistaking it 30mm empty. Both rocket pods dry. No remaining countermeasures. Her bird was out of fight. She keyed her mic over the open channel, her voice low and measured. Last pass. No firepower. No one responded. Below, the compound's outer wall had all but collapsed. The SEALs were falling back to an interior position, dragging one man who couldn't walk and covering another who'd stopped firing. The militia closed in tight small arms, fast footwork, probing toward a final push. Blaze didn't climb. She didn't reposition. She flipped off the targeting system entirely and dropped the Apache into a dive so steep the proximity alarm went into full shriek. The frame shuddered as she pulled into a run along the slope, the rotors shrieking louder than the sirens. She flew lower than safe, banking to angle the fuselage just over the exposed hillside where the enemy was cresting. Dirt exploded beneath her. Dust kicked up in sheets. The sound alone cracked like thunder inside a canyon drum. Fighters scattered. One dove behind a boulder. Another turned and fired instinctively, but wide. The panic hit fast if she was this low. They must have thought. Then, she was about to release something heavy. But there was nothing left to fire. She leveled the nose, pulled up just before the canyon wall, and cleared it by meters. Behind her, the hillside stopped moving. For a few seconds, no one advanced. The militia regrouped slower now, watching the sky, waiting for what never came. Inside the cockpit, the warning panel still blinked. Her fuel was down to minimum. The HUD showed zeros across weapons, and a red triangle pulsed faintly over a systems load warning. But she didn't turn away. She circled wide and came back around again. Slower, this time, showing them the undercarriage, like a threat, made visible. The bird might have been empty, but from the ground, it still looked loaded. She heard it faintly, one SEAL's voice, half laughing, half winded, over the open net. "They thought you were going to finish the mountain." Blaze didn't answer. She tipped the nose again, letting the rotors echo across the slope. The sky didn't blink. It just stayed there, angry and silent, long enough to make them doubt every next move. And sometimes that was the weapon. The ridge barely counted as level ground. It was a scab of shale and packed dirt, sloped just enough to threaten roll if she came in too fast, but it was the only stretch wide enough, close enough, and not already blanketed in gunfire. Reagan Monroe skimmed the edge once to gauge angle, then looped tight and dropped into position. The Apache's skids hit hard. Dust blasted up around her. She began counting aloud in her helmet, voice flat, metered. 1, 2, 3. The SEALs emerged from the smoke at a sprint, hunched low, carrying one between them and dragging another by the collar. Muzzle flashes cracked in the valley below. The hillside lit up with muzzle flare and red tracer. She didn't flinch. 4, 5. The bird took its first hit. A sharp impact to the tail boom. She glanced at the panel, no catastrophic alarms. Still green, still flyable. 6, 7. The first man hit the cargo step and hauled the wounded inside. Second followed, panting hard, blood trailing from his boot. Another shout inaudible through the rotors. Another blast of dirt erupted off the left flank. 8, 9. The third staggered, took a hit to his plate carrier, spun but kept moving. He shoved the last man onto the skid and climbed in behind him. Blaze watched his shadow flick inside through the lower pane. 10, 11. She didn't wait for 12. Throttle forward, nose tipped, tail rotor compensating for crosswind. The Apache shuddered under torque as she pushed redline and lifted just above the slope. More gunfire followed, wild and panicked, rounds stitched across the dirt where the bird had just been. She cleared the ridge by 3 meters, maybe less. Debris scraped the skids on ascent. The whole cabin echoed with labored breath and shouted numbers as the SEALs began to count who had made it. Blaze said nothing. Her hands stayed locked on the controls. Her helmet pressed firm to the comms mount, muting the world beyond the aircraft's beat. Another alert blinked, tail boom damaged, structural stress uneven. She acknowledged it silently and kept flying. Behind her, smoke curled up from the ridge. No one fired a second volley. The militia had missed their shot. So had death. The tail boom would need repair. It was scarred now, slashed open by a round meant to stop the whole thing from ever leaving, but it had left. 12 seconds, that's what the fight cost. And it was paid in full. The Apache ran black. No lights, no signals, no external identifiers, just steel and shadow cutting across the canyon air. Behind them, the team was silent, crammed into the rear cabin, bruised and bloodied but breathing. Ahead, the ridgeline curved north, moonlight streaking against the angled rock in thin silver lines. Below, a tech truck climbed fast across a lower trail, engine screaming under its own weight, a mounted anti-air gun pivoting wildly. Reagan Monroe saw it on visual alone. No targeting, no radar, just instinct and the gleam of steel too bright to be rock. She didn't climb, not yet. Instead, she let the Apache hug the ridge wall, blades just meters from scrape. Her breath stayed steady, sinking to the rise and fall of canyon drafts. The enemy couldn't see her, only hear the hum, the sound of something waiting, somewhere above. She jerked the nose up suddenly, mimicking an escape climb, and vanished behind the far ridge. The tech truck adjusted upward, gunners repositioning for what they assumed would be a straight-line ascent. They readied for the kill. But she didn't climb. She dipped, rolled left, pitched the Apache into a downward arc no sane pilot would risk with this much weight and this much damage. The dive came silent, sudden, and head-on. From the gunner's point of view, the sky itself split open. No lights, no warning. Just the thunder of rotor wash and the unblinking shadow of the bird bearing down faster than sound. Blaze skimmed the truck at under 10 meters, rotors sending dust and rock into a cyclone. The tech vehicle swerved. The gunner fired wildly. Blind. The driver overcorrected. Back tires slipped against loose gravel. The truck veered off the trail, caught an edge, and rolled once before smashing belly first into the canyon floor. She didn't look back. The Apache leveled, tail rotor whining under stress, engine breathing hard. She adjusted trim and set course northwest, toward home. No words, no cheer. Just the echo of her passing, still trapped in the canyon below. The truck hadn't been destroyed by weapons. It had been crushed by doubt, by the illusion of certain death cast from sky. Steel wings in darkness. That was all they saw. That was enough. Because no one follows an Apache at midnight. The skids hit the tarmac harder than intended. Reagan Monroe didn't correct it. The Apache held barely. The low whine of the turbine began to taper off, and for the first time in hours, the rotors slowed. Steam hissed from a wounded coolant line beneath the cowling. The bird leaked fuel in quiet taps onto concrete. Her panels glowed faint red from heat warnings, but she ignored them. The mission was over. The back hatch unlatched. The SEALs moved stiffly, without ceremony. One had a bloodied bandage knotted above his knee. Another helped their limping comms specialist off the step. The last out turned at the ramp, reached back, and slapped the scarred tail boom once open palm. Flat. 7 down, he muttered, not quite looking at her. 1 standing. No one laughed. No one needed to. Blaze sat still in the cockpit for a moment longer. Visor down, breath shallow. Sweat had fogged the edges of the lens. She didn't wipe it. Her hands stayed on her lap until the rotors fully stilled. Outside, the air was dry, rimmed with dust. Base personnel watched from behind barriers and equipment bays. No one stepped forward. A few stared at the Apache. One made a note on a clipboard. No questions, no greeting. She stood slowly, each motion deliberate and fatigued. Climbing down from the cockpit was harder now, her legs stiff from tension held too long. Her boots hit the ground with a dull thud. The concrete was still warm. The SEALs had already moved on, heading toward the med tent in silence, carrying their own. Blaze walked a short arc to the rear of the aircraft. The tail boom smoked faintly at its stress fracture. The slap mark from the SEAL's glove remained dusty, visible. She looked at it for a few seconds, then turned toward the edge of the tarmac, helmet in hand, chin strap loose. Her visor hung askew with dried sweat traced across the inside. Nobody called her name. No one summoned her to the talk. There'd be a report eventually. There'd be a question about authorization. Maybe, but not now. She walked past the line of floodlights that cut the airfield into yellow and black, each footstep steadier than it felt. Not limping, not hurrying, just forward. Behind her, the Apache sat motionless, tail scarred, cockpit empty, blades still, the only proof that 7 men had left that valley alive. and the one who flew them home never said a word. Inside the talk, the lights never changed. They stayed cool, sterile, indifferent to what time it was or what had just happened outside the wire. A junior officer sat at a terminal, auto-filling mission logs. The system flagged an anomaly SEAL Team Charlie extracted without authorized support. No aircraft ID on record, no flight path, no airframe signed out. He frowned, checked comms history. Nothing tagged, no official launch, no sortie logged. He highlighted the blank field, then let it go. The default phrase populated rescued by unknown air asset. Across the room, a senior commander skimmed the report on a tablet and shrugged. No orders logged. No record, he said, setting the tablet down without comment. No one in the room raised a question. The screens went back to drone feeds and patrol schedules. The war rolled on. Outside, Reagan Monroe sat alone on the hangar stairs. Her boots were still coated in ridge dust. Her flight suit was unzipped halfway, the sleeves damp with sweat that had dried into a crusted salt line. Her helmet sat beside her on the metal step, visor turned down, reflecting nothing. She watched the far end of the tarmac where fuel trucks hummed and maintenance crews walked past without looking at her. No one spoke. No one saluted. She hadn't been summoned. No debrief. No reprimand. Not yet. The absence was its own kind of acknowledgement. Footsteps approached from behind, steady but unhurried. She didn't turn. A SEAL passed by, the same one who'd slapped the tail boom. His gait was slower now, shoulder taped, boot scuffed. He didn't stop walking. He didn't speak. He just let something fall into her hand as he moved past. Blaze looked down. A patch sat in her palm. Standard canvas. Clean embroidery. No rank. No name. Just 2 characters. 6.1. She didn't close her hand around it. Not right away. Just held it there. Thumb brushing the edge. The fabric was stiff. Recently stitched. She looked out past the flight line where the Apache sat cooling, scarred and quiet under floodlights. No one would write this one down. Not in a way that would last. But 7 men were alive. 1 bird had come back. And this patch small, unlogged, was more truth than any form waiting in the system. Blaze didn't need a line in the record. She had the only number that mattered.